Can you talk a little bit about the model that Genentech has in place to help ensure that a wide range of viewpoints and ideas are taken into account for any given initiative? What are some of the elements that make that work or don't?
Yeah. I mentioned the accountability structure earlier. Um, Knowing who has the decision, we say who has the D. There are signs up around campus in rooms, and when we're virtual, we have to remember it ourselves, right? Who has the decision? And we have a single decision maker model that says someone needs to be accountable for making the decision. And the process that we go through is one of casting a wide net for input, not a carelessly wide net for input, but a carefully thought out a net for input, and then taking all that in as appreciations and considerations. And I think this is a key because a lot of people they think if I'm going to give you my input, you better do something with it. Right. And there was a leader that I interacted with a little while ago who said, I gave them all my input and then they didn't use it. And so why did they even ask me? Well, that's that ego coming back in. Right. So, who is the decision maker? Who has that ultimate accountability? Who are we going to gather input from? And when those people share input, they share them as appreciations and considerations. And sharing it as a consideration really acknowledges that I know who the decision maker is, and I'm going to share that and let you do what you need to do with it, right? And then, of course, the decision has to be made. And one of the things we forget to do is to go back to those folks who we gathered input from and share how their input impacted our decision making. And that sharing back often is a critical key to aligning people after a decision has been made, even if there was some contentiousness around which way it would go.
Oh gosh, lots there. So one is being very intentional about ensuring that the ultimate decision maker is clearly identified. And those joining this call on my team know that we definitely subscribe to that. And it can't be multiple people. There's got to be, at the end of the day, a single decision maker. And then also striving to cast a wide but not reckless, so an intentional net to ensure that you get many, many, many diverse perspectives and views, as Dawn has talked about multiple times. And then I'm assuming, Steven, that there was a lot of intention behind these word choices. They're considerations. What was the other?
Appreciations and considerations. What I really appreciate about that is XYZ, and I'd like you to consider ABC. And it's so important, actually, to frame those considerations as statements. We could ask questions for clarification, and we kind of make that distinction. What's the difference between a question for clarification and something I'd like you to consider that people frame as a question? Because if we're really rigorous about this, the answer, to I'd like you to consider that going in that direction is going to create all of these unintended consequences. And the appropriate answer there is thank you. And I could still ask questions like, well, what are those unintended consequences? And then thank you, right? So, but oftentimes when people share considerations, they share them as a question. And then we often feel compelled to answer a question when it's asked. It's some discipline to say thank you. And the thank you acknowledges that I actually am going to be making that decision. I've heard you, and I will take that into consideration.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dawn, I want to get your input. First, I want to share something that's very relevant to the point you made, Steven, about the importance of ensuring that you close the loop with those that participated in the process and help them to understand, even if their idea wasn't adopted, how that input contributed to the ultimate solution. That brings to mind something I read recently, that a number of design thinkers and creative experts are in agreement that one of the sole uh, components that weakens creativity has nothing to do with how the ideas are generated. It's how the ideas are treated. And this quote, I think, really drives it home. John Brownstein, Chief Innovation Officer of Boston Children's Hospital, said that less than 5% of all ideas shared are actionable. So you better handle the other 95% gently. So, Dawn, in your experience, what advice do you have for handling all those ideas that aren't actionable gently?
Um, well, first of all, I love that the word gently was part of the advice. Wouldn't the workplace and the world be a better place if we treated one another gently? I think this directly builds on some of what Steven said in that last example of what they do at Genentech. And I think there are things that happen in the process of receiving those ideas that are really important, and something at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I think the beginning is really making sure you have a valid and clear intent. So there has to be a reason that you're asking people for their ideas. So, the person that you referenced, I think it's someone who works at a children's hospital. So maybe it's a suggestion box somewhere. But typically, when we're asking people for their ideas, there's a reason behind it. And so I think making sure you have a legitimate reason to want to know their ideas, and that you are legitimately intending to act on something, is important. It should be clear what you're asking people for and why. And I think also in that intent is sharing those expectations about what will happen with their input. Will it be considered, or will it be actioned, as Steven mentioned? And so really making that clear from the outset, that we want to hear your ideas so we can get to a better one, So it might not be that your idea is actioned, but it will be considered. That's really important. I think another gently with that valid intent is that there is weighted input from people. So especially if you're asking for ideas from people who will be impacted by the decision that's made, their input into that for ideas is weighted. It's heavier than those who aren't affected or impacted by the decision. So I think making sure that you have a valid and clear intent, and that's clearly communicated in those people who are end users, as you will, of those ideas, or have weighted input. And in the middle, I think there's that gratitude piece. Both of you have mentioned that. So thanking people from their ideas. Some people might give ideas to provoke a reaction, but I think the vast majority of people offer suggestions that they're serious about. And that takes time and energy and thought, and sometimes vulnerability to offer suggestions. So those should be treated gently, with honor and with gratitude, even if 95% of them are unactionable. And then I think the end part is that feedback loop, that accountability that Steven mentioned. So we see organizations make this mistake a lot. They ask people for ideas, they might say thank you, but then they don't ever go back and close that loop and say what was implemented as a result of the ideas they received. So we see this in surveys a lot. Clients will come and tell us, oh, they don't want to take another survey. Well, it might not be that they don't want to take another survey. It's just they don't want to take another survey that there's nothing done as a result of the input that they gave on their survey. So coming back and circling back is important. I think it can happen at the macro level as an organization and the micro level at a team. So, even in a meeting, be clear about why you're asking for ideas. Thank everyone, not just some. We sometimes tend to say, great idea to one person and say, huh, to another. So thank everyone for their ideas, indicate what's going to happen next with their ideas, and then circle back and tell them what happened as a result of their ideas.